The following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
Since Abney's founding 40 years ago, this is our 40th year, and we'll be announcing an event in the fall to celebrate our 40th anniversary. It's a little scary to think that Abney's been around for 40 years. But the cornerstone of Abney has always been our desire and our main focus to make sure that our city and state have their fiscal house in order. In the mid-'70s, as everyone knows, on the verge of bankruptcy, when the city was at its darkest hours, Abney was one of the prime movers in leading New York out of that fiscal crisis. Today, our nation, our state, is again facing a complicated economic reality. There isn't a day where we all don't see in the paper about the debt ceiling discussions. The clock is ticking, and whatever happens with those negotiations will definitely have an impact on our city and state. Governor Cuomo has said numerous times it's time to get our state fiscal house in order once and for all. And last week, Deputy Mayor Bob Steele, speaking at the Citizens Budget Commission, talked about the critical need for pension reform to rein in costs while continuing to provide secure retirement to the city's workers. We know that any change in the system must come cooperatively from the city, state, labor leaders, and all of us in this room. And Abney hopefully will continue to provide a forum for a dialogue and discussion on these important issues. Comptroller DiNapoli, during these trying times, we look for leadership on all of these issues and to help return us to a path of fiscal health. We are thankful for Governor Cuomo and the legislature for passing an on-time budget, as well as property tax caps and many other items that were included in this year's budget. But much more work remains to be done in the coming months in order to stabilize our economy, including, most importantly, health care reform. Throughout 2011, our state economy has struggled, and Comptroller, you and your staff, along with the governor, have been vigilant in restoring New York's fiscal path with great focus. Since taking office in 2007 as the 54th Comptroller, Tom has transformed the way the Comptroller's office does business by increasing oversight of government spending, providing greater transparency and openness to the public, and developing new opportunities for New York entrepreneurs. Prior to becoming Comptroller, Tom represented the 16th District, Assembly District in northwestern Nassau County. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli.
Bill Rudin for that great introduction, and I thank Bill for his leadership of this very important association. Abney has been a wonderful and very important catalyst for bringing people together, moving our city and by extension our state forward, and I really appreciate those efforts. Bill asked me before I talk about our pension system, which is the focus of my comments this morning, he asked me just to give a little more definition to the news that we released yesterday and some of the press picked up on. Our revenue certainly is up this year, certainly compared to last year, and up significantly higher than the current financial plan projections. We do need to temper that good news with a recognition of a couple of factors. First of all, it's a look at the first quarter of our fiscal year. Remember, the state's fiscal year starts on April 1st, so it really is just the first check. Much of that increased revenue from personal income tax collections has a lot to do with tax settlements that happened during that first quarter, really reflecting more earnings of prior months in the prior year of high earners. So no reason to think that that is necessarily going to hold up throughout this fiscal year. We are also seeing the wind down of the federal stimulus money. That certainly has been a help in terms of revenue coming to the state. And on the spending side, while spending has been lower than projections, Again, some of that has to do with timing of payments, and when you look at the overall context of the tenuous economic condition that we're in, and none of us has a crystal ball as to where it's all going, although, you know, Ken Adams probably has the closest to an insight there. So when you come to talk to Abney next, you'll tell us where it's all headed. But, you know, any of the analysis that I'm seeing certainly is expecting as much of a continued slowdown and going in the opposite direction rather than any kind of a robust recovery in the near term. We certainly, as we are painfully aware, going to be affected by big debates going on in Washington right now. We're certainly affected by the global economy that we're in and the weakness that we're reading about on a daily basis in too many of the European countries. So we have, from my point of view, every reason to be exceedingly cautious. And while it certainly is good news, and I think it's reflective, as Bill pointed out, that we got a budget done on time and a certainly much more responsible budget enacted this year by the governor and the legislature, we still have a long way to go. So we're not ready to spend that extra money yet. We still have to monitor very carefully our spending, monitor very carefully where our revenue is at, and really take a very, very cautious approach. So I'm here to talk, though, and focus on the issue of public pensions. I don't have to tell you, it's a topic of great discussion across our nation. What I would like to do is update you on the state of the New York State Common Retirement Fund, our state system. Where is it at in 2011? What have we done over the past 4 years to make it better? And what we're continuing to do to ensure that the fund and the retirements of our members are secure now and into the future. Keep in mind, and I know we're here in New York City, the New York State Common Retirement Fund supports the state retirement system. So for New York, we have 7 public pension plans. We have the one that I'm the trustee for. We have the teachers' retirement system, which is a separate state plan. And then we have the 5 New York City pension systems as well. I'm going to be talking about the one I know best, the one that I serve as trustee for. And I do it, you know, very deliberately because we have our own story to tell. You know, each system is managed differently, different governance structure. And what I find too often is that, especially when you draw it out in terms of national comparisons, the story that we have in New York really doesn't get told as completely as it should be told. So that's the context within which I offer these comments. We all know public pensions, hot-button topic in state houses all across this nation. Week after week, we read negative stories coming out of states like New Jersey. My apologies to Mr. Burgos and other New Jersey residents who are here, and Illinois, where public pension plans are seriously underfunded and overburdened. Too often, the media coverage, from my point of view, some of it misleading, dumps all state pension plans into the same pool of fiscal distress, suggesting that all are in trouble and all are unsustainable. Let me give my perspective on that question and what I think is the record for New York State. New York is not New Jersey, and we're not Illinois. In its 90th year, 90 years, the New York retirement system, supported by the Common Retirement Fund, remains one of the strongest, most sustainable public pension systems in America. As the fund marks 90 years, I think it's appropriate against that backdrop of that debate in our own state, as Bill pointed out, and the national debate, to take a look back at where we started to provide a roadmap in terms of where we're going. Back in 1918, a transformative New York leader, Governor Al Smith, signed a law that established a state commission on pensions. And I'll quote the charge to that commission. Inquire into the subject of retirement pensions, allowances, and annuities for state and municipal officers and employees, especially with reference to the method of establishing and maintaining the fund from which such allowances and annuities shall be paid. In 1920, as directed, the commission issued their report in what they said very simply was the problem of retirement. The problem described in the report was daunting, a haphazard landscape of disparate pension plans, many facing bankruptcy, that provided little benefit for public workers. Back in 1920, a public employee with any pension, no matter how meager or precarious, was fortunate. More than half of these men and women didn't get a nickel in retirement. The Commission recommended a pension for all public employees, one that would provide an adequate and certain income to retirees to ensure they would not be poor in old age. Governor Smith and the state legislature heeded that recommendation, passing into law Chapter 741 of the laws of 1920, which created the New York State retirement system. From its inaugural year in 1921, when it served 4,600 members, the fund has grown into a system that today includes 3,000 employers and more than 1 million members. In 2011, the New York State Common Retirement Fund is the third largest in the nation. And according to outside validators, the Pew Center, particularly Governing Magazine, among others, is recognized as among the best funded and best run in America. Our fund is tremendously resilient. Economic storms over the last 9 decades have not undermined its foundations. The fund has withstood every onslaught from the Great Depression to the Great Recession, still strong and poised to meet its future obligations. With a healthy annual return of 14.6% for fiscal year 2010-11 that ended on March 31st, the fund now has assets totaling $146.5 billion, the highest since the global meltdown of 08 and 09. I think we look great for 90 years old. That the fund has been able to navigate through difficult economic currents and arrive in 2011 healthy and well-funded is a result of a number of key institutional factors that have buoyed our system since its establishment. Our conservative actuarial method continues to ensure that we will always be well-funded. Importantly, we follow this method scrupulously rather than take shortcuts in difficult times. Our investment expertise continues to enable us to take advantage of market opportunities, while our diversified and balanced portfolio allows us to minimize risk. Decade after decade, we have required the state and local governments to make their payments to the fund. And unlike some states that have skipped their annual payments, sometime for years, even in good years, New York State has never missed a payment. And perhaps most important of all, independently elected New York controllers have consistently protected the Common Retirement Fund against political interference, specifically raids on the fund. Let's talk for a moment about employer contribution rates that have been the cause of so much recent discussion. We hear again and again about rising pension bills and how they're eating up local budgets. While employer rates certainly have increased, and I must tell you will continue to rise in the near term, these increases are driven, no surprise, largely by the devastating market decline in 08 and 09. It's wrong to use the bad behavior on Wall Street that nearly drove the world economy into another Great Depression as an excuse to do away with defined benefits. While we read every day about pension costs, the other side of the ledger does not get adequate attention. For the 2010-2011 fiscal year, the fund paid out $8.5 billion in benefits to 380,000 retirees and beneficiaries. How are those benefits paid for? The fact is, over the past 20 years, 83 cents of every benefit dollar paid to retirees has been from investment returns, not employee or employer contributions. That number is significantly higher than the national average of 68% for state plans. While an article about a retiree drawing a 6-figure pension will draw your attention, let me give you some statistics that provide a more complete picture. Less than 0.5% of all retirees in our system receive pensions exceeding $100,000. The average state pension, and this figure excludes police and fire, but it covers 94% of our retirees, the average pension, and we updated these numbers this week, is $19,000 and change, $19,151. 76% of our retirees receive a pension of less than $30,000 a year. 1 in 5 retirees, nearly 70,000 of our retirees, receives a pension of less than $5,000 a year. The state of the pension fund is strong today, both in terms of its assets and its ability to meet obligations to current and future retirees. and the management of the pension fund is more ethical, transparent, and accountable than it's ever been, a direct result of our efforts to restore public trust in response to the corruption storm that erupted 4 years ago. As we all now know, I inherited a mess back in 2007. Corruption, influence peddling, and self-dealing flourished. To his credit, the investigation and the 2010 conviction of Mr. Hevesy by then Attorney General Andrew Cuomo sent an emphatic message that engaging in these kinds of crooked practices and betraying the public trust has serious consequences. But I didn't wait for the Attorney General's investigation to be completed to take action. I instituted a number of major reforms that restored ethics and integrity in the way the pension fund does business. In late 2007, I convened a special pension fund task force chaired by the former Massachusetts State Treasurer and Chair of the Massachusetts Pension Investment Management Board, Shannon O'Brien, to perform a comprehensive review of the Common Retirement Fund. As a result of the task force's recommendation, the fund now reports investment performance results quarterly and releases all fund transactions to the public every month. It's on our website. We also formed an internal investment committee that now provides additional transparency and internal review in the decision-making process. And we strengthened our independent investment advisory committee by appointing a chair, adopting new policies and procedures, and recruiting new highly qualified members. As many of you know, I also banned the involvement of placement agents, paid intermediaries, and lobbyists in any investment transactions. I put an end to pay-to-play, adopting the SEC's political contribution framework ahead of the SEC's own schedule. I injected more accountability and oversight into the investment process. Following the recommendations of another group I established, the Management Review Commission, that was co-chaired by former Mayor Ed Koch and former NASDAQ Chair Frank Zarb, I created the position of Inspector General at the Comptroller's Office for corruption complaints to be reviewed and addressed, as well as the position of Special Counsel for Ethics, with a particular emphasis on ethics training for investment staff. I initiated a comprehensive review of all external fund consultants. I assembled a pension integrity unit to identify and prevent errors, fraud, and abuse, and make sure that only people entitled to pensions are receiving them. And I instituted a strict code of ethics for all State Comptroller staff. This year, I asked the legislature to make our placement agent ban permanent by making it a part of state law. I introduced a campaign finance reform bill that would set spending and contribution limits in primary and general elections for Comptroller, provide for public financing to take the influence of private money out of the process, and establish an independent campaign finance fund board to monitor and audit the program and enforce its provisions. And I introduced legislation to crack down on pension abusers by providing our office access to the State Department of Tax and Finance wage reporting system to identify retirees working for local governments who are making more than the state's post-retirement earnings cap of $30,000. Each of these reforms is designed to help us better meet our overriding responsibility, growing the fund and ensuring retirement security for the more than 1 million members of our system, and also recognizing the costs involved with maintaining the system. To that end, I want to remind you that in 2009, the legislature and the governor established a new tier, a Tier 5, which increased employee contributions, capped the amount of overtime included in the calculation of benefits, and increased the age at which retirees can receive a full pension. This new tier returned the benefit structure to pre-2000 levels, pre-year 2000 levels, and is expected to save billions over the long term. This year, towards the end of the session, the governor proposed another new tier, a Tier 6, which would build on the Tier 5 changes by raising the retirement age from 62 to 65, increasing employee contributions, and eliminating overtime from pension calculations. Obviously, Tier 6 will continue to be discussed. But as with Tier 5, it's critical that the employee representatives be a part of the discussion. The drumbeat also continues from some voices to move from our defined benefit pension plan to a 401k-style defined contribution savings account. That is not a point of view that I share, and let me tell you why. First, very simply, I believe we have a responsibility to provide public employees a secure retirement for their years of service. This is particularly true of employees with the lowest wages. Studies have shown that 401ks are higher risk and don't provide nearly the financial security as well-run defined benefit plans like ours. Recent history should serve as a cautionary tale. We often hear about pension fund losses, but let's keep in mind just one study to quote. Boston College's Center for Retirement Research pointed out 401k plans lost a collective $1 trillion from '07 to '09, $1 trillion of retirement security that's gone. We've all seen the stories in recent years, elderly retirees in too many cases, 75, 80 years old, some with health problems, lost most of their savings when they hit the market at the wrong time and their 401 accounts nosedived. Some of them being forced to go back into the workforce for minimum wage jobs just to pay for essentials. Many others who are planning to retire but now have to continue to work without knowing when they might be able to retire. I think our older workers and our retirees deserve better. Secondly, studies have shown that defined benefit plans cost 46% less than individual 401k savings accounts. And finally, individuals must save at a rate that ensures that their funds will last well into their 90s, because we all think we're going to make it into our 90s. In contrast, large institutional plans like ours have assets that are based instead on the average mortality of our members. So it gives us, in a way, a chance to be perpetually young in terms of how we establish our asset allocation. If less income security for retirees and higher costs are not strong enough reasons to be wary of moving to a 401k or defined contribution plan, I'll give another reason. From my point of view, it would hurt our economy at a very fragile time. And let me tell you why. Our economy is largely driven by consumer spending. Retirees collecting secure pensions and workers who have confidence they will receive a pension in the future are reliable spenders who have a stabilizing impact on our local economies. Because they receive secure state pensions, 77% of our retirees continue to live in the state. I think it's an important number to keep in mind. We always have this vision everybody is going to move down south. 77% of our retirees continue to live in the state. And I'm sure having that pension is often the difference in personal calculations about where you live. That means the retirement benefits that we pay out continue to be recycled into our state's economy, constituting an estimated $6.5 billion in spending that stays in New York State. It's also worth noting that replacing the pension fund with individual 401k savings accounts would also negate some of the constructive investments the fund makes here in New York State. Investments through our in-state private equity investment program have not only performed solidly for the fund, but also benefited New York's economy by funding startups and helping existing companies to grow, creating thousands of jobs. And we want to do more in that area. We've been talking with Ken and his team about how we can partner in that effort. And our Emerging Manager Program is a national leader in providing access to capital for emerging firms, particularly for women and minority-owned firms. And let's remember, institutional investors, like public pension plans, provide an important source of capital for the private equity industry. And much of that industry is based here in New York City, the financial capital of the world. From my point of view, we should not participate in a race to the bottom when it comes to retirement security. Instead of joining that race, New York should continue to set the bar as high as we've been setting it for the last 90 years. Rather than finding new ways to undermine the financial security of the 1 million members of our state and local retirement system, we should be thinking about how to shore up the financial futures of the millions of New Yorkers whose retirement futures now rest on shaky foundations. Individuals who in many cases, their entire retirement savings consist of those 401ks. And I've seen studies that suggest that, on average, the balance of those 401ks these days is only about $46,000. For many families, this is a looming crisis. This is our new problem in 2011, our problem of retirement, reminiscent of the one faced by that State Commission on Pensions that Al Smith convened back in 1920. Years from now, we could have an entire generation of retirees who don't have enough money to get by. And I fear in some cases we could be creating an aged underclass that may increasingly depend on government for services, food, housing, and so on. We can't afford to walk away from this problem or leave it for someone else to deal with. We must consider this question in our policy choices today. Perhaps it's time for a national commission to talk about ways to maintain existing defined benefit plans, as well as to seek creative solutions to address the retirement security challenge facing those with inadequate retirement resources. As we mark the New York State Retirement Fund's 90th year, we owe Al Smith and the members of the 1920 state legislature our gratitude for creating a system that has stood the test of time, remains a rock-solid source of security to 1 million members working and retired. Our first priority is to continue to provide these men and women the secure retirements that they've earned. We have some challenges ahead, there's no question about it. Even with the recent strong performance of our fund, near-term increases in pension contributions for employers will continue to fuel calls for dramatic changes to our system. But I'd like to leave you with this thought. It's never wise to make policy at the extremes. Back in 2000, at a time when investment returns were exceptionally high and contribution rates were historically low, in some cases less than 1% contribution rate for government employers, we increased benefits, expecting the market behavior that was happening in the late 90s to stay strong and continue. As we well know, that didn't happen. Now we're at another extreme, a time of fiscal stress, low recovery from the global financial crisis, and spiking contribution rates caused largely by the collapse of 08 and 09. From my point of view, it would be a mistake to overreact and undermine a retirement system that has served us well for so many years. By continuing to chart the successful course that has sustained us for the last 90 years, investing wisely, paying our bills, while also continuously striving to improve our operations and strengthen accountability and transparency, we can ensure that the New York State Common Retirement Fund remains among the best funded in the nation and a model for other states. I think, as Bill noted in the introduction, this is a topic that's going to continue. But I do think we need to approach the topic with a fuller context and a fuller realization about what the history has been, what the reality of the impact of these pensions has been on real people's lives. I always say as controller, always throwing around, numbers and charts and aggregating, over 1 million members and 385,000 retirees. And, sometimes we forget that there are real people and real families attached to those numbers. So I offer these thoughts as a chance to point out to you as New Yorkers why you should be proud of the state pension system that we have. But also, whatever your point of view is today on how we move forward, keep in mind the full picture. There's information that I pointed out that I wish I would read every day in those same articles that always point out what they see as the problems and the excesses. Let's have a balanced point of view. And also, as Bill has said, and certainly for what ABNY stands for, everybody has to be part of the discussion. And when it comes to pension reform, ultimately the decision is not mine. It's the decision of the legislature and the governor. But when you look at how we've moved reform forward in the past, particularly with Tier 5, or you look at the status of contract negotiations at the state level, and some big negotiations were concluded recently. How were those effective? Again, as Bill said, with everybody around the table, with the employee organizations as part of the discussion. They have as much, if not more, to gain or lose by the security of the system than anybody else. They need to be part of the dialogue. And when we hit on some common ground and some common sense, that's how we can perhaps have some additional reforms and changes moving forward. But we need to keep a balanced point of view about what our history has been, where we're at today, if we're going to chart a successful course for the future. Thank you for your individual and collective efforts on behalf of ABNY and the City of New York, and it's great to be with you.